My name is Lucas Morrow, and I don't remember the moment I stopped breathing, but I do remember the moment I noticed. It was the light above Ari's hospital bed, too white, too steady, like it was trying to pretend everything beneath it wasn't unraveling. My son's chest rose and fell with the help of a machine, and the room beeped around him like some cruel metronome counting down something I wasn't ready for. 6 years old, and his tiny fingers barely twitched when I brushed them. I sat close, my chair angled just enough to rest my elbow near his forestand, and tried to convince myself this was temporary. A nightmare. Some terrible mistake. And then my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting maybe a doctor's update, or my friend Grant checking in. But no, it was from Trina, my wife's sister. Of all people. A text, light as air. Just bring the cupcakes for Naomi's school party. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered. There was a knot in my throat too tight to swallow. I read the message again. Then again. The words didn't change. Cupcakes. For a party. Like I was at home. Like my son wasn't hooked to wires and tubes. Like I hadn't just signed papers confirming I understood the severity of his condition. I finally typed back, my fingers trembling more than I wanted to admit. I'm in the hospital. Ari's fighting for his life. The response came back almost instantly. You always ruin things. And there it was. The world tilted. Not from the message itself. I was used to Trina's barbs, the passive-aggressive digs masked in smiles, but from the context. My son was dying, and somehow, I was still the inconvenience. Still the burden to their plans. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just froze. The air around me felt thinner, tighter, like the ICU walls were closing in. That's when the door creaked open. The doctor, a man I barely knew but had come to recognize by his quiet shoes and the coffee breath he never bothered to mask, stepped in holding a manila folder. His eyes didn't meet mine right away, and when they did, I saw it, the kind of shadow that means something more than bad news. It meant conflict. It meant secrets. He cleared his throat, but I already knew what he was about to say wasn't routine. Mr. Morrow, he said softly, his voice respectful in the way people get when they're about to shatter you with the truth. We need to talk about your wife's sister. Everything in me locked down. My mind scrambled, trying to connect dots that hadn't even existed seconds before. Trina? I asked, barely getting the name out. He nodded and walked closer, setting the folder on the tray beside Ari's bed. He didn't open it right away. He looked at my son first. That quiet glance told me he wasn't just doing his job. He was a father too, maybe, or someone who had seen too many children like Ari. Finally, he flipped the folder open, and inside, I saw the charts, the graphs, the red circles around values I didn't understand. But one word jumped out. Toxicology. The doctor continued. We ran some extensive tests when Ari was admitted. His initial symptoms didn't match the flu or a viral infection. We needed to be sure. And now we are. I said nothing. My throat had closed again, my hands gripping the sides of the chair so tight my knuckles burned. Ethylene glycol, he said. It's the main compound in antifreeze. My mind buckled. What? It's not something that would be in his system by accident, he said gently. Not in the amount we found. My heart thudded once, heavy and hollow. The memory slammed into me uninvited. 2 days ago, I'd left Ari with Trina for just under 3 hours. Just long enough to pick up my final paycheck and clear my locker at the warehouse. I'd been forced to quit when his seizures started escalating. Couldn't work and drive across town to specialists every other day. Trina had offered to help. She'd said Celine was too stressed, and she knew how to handle kids. I had been too tired, too desperate. I agreed. When I came back, Ari had been napping. His skin had felt cold. He's just sleepy, Trina said with a laugh. Kids crash after cartoons. I believed her. God help me. I believed her. The doctor was still speaking, but my ears rang so loud I barely caught the next part. Something about contacting authorities, how the toxicology report had triggered protocol. But none of it pierced the roar in my head. Then something else hit me, something small but sudden. The monitor. Not the hospital one. The one at home. The baby monitor. Years ago, I bought a cheap audio recorder disguised as a nursery cam. It wasn't fancy, but it synced to my phone, recorded everything. I'd used it in Ari's room more for nostalgia than anything, saving little conversations, bedtime songs. Trina had watched him in that room. I pulled out my phone, hand shaking, and opened the app. There it was. The last synced session. A full 3 hours. I pressed play. Crackling. Silence. Then her voice. Here, drink this. Andy made it special for you. My stomach turned. My son's small cough followed. A faint groan. Then silence. I paused it. I couldn't take more. My hand flew to my mouth, and I stood slowly, numb, like my body was acting before my mind caught up. I looked at the doctor. He was watching me carefully, but I could tell he hadn't heard the recording. Not yet. Can I send this to someone? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Yes, he said quickly. Send it to the hospital legal team. We'll notify the police. I nodded. Or maybe I didn't. I don't remember. I only remember looking at Ari again, at his still face, the slow beeping beside him. I leaned down, pressing my forehead gently to the edge of his bed. I've got you, I whispered. I've got you now. And I meant it. For the first time in days, I wasn't just scared. I was furious, focused, ready, because this wasn't just an illness. It was an attack, and I was going to find out just how far it went. The moment I heard the word antifreeze, everything changed. It didn't feel real at first. You hear about people poisoning kids in news blurbs or true crime podcasts, not in the fluorescent chill of your own child's ICU room. Not with your son hooked to a ventilator. Not when the culprit might be someone who once called him her little marshmallow. I sat there, the recording still on my phone, the doctor's words bouncing around my skull like marbles in a glass jar. Ethylene glycol. Intentional. Not an accident. That one fact tore through my denial like a blade through paper. After the doctor left, I couldn't sit anymore. I paced the corner of the room like a caged animal, glancing at Ari every few seconds. His small chest rose and fell mechanically, his eyelids fluttering slightly as though caught in a bad dream. And that's when the anger really kicked in, not the kind that makes you scream or punch walls. No, this was surgical. Focused. Cold. I pulled out my phone again, opened the baby monitor app, and scrolled back to the night I'd left Ari with Trina. It was just supposed to be a favor. I had called her because Celine had bailed at the last minute, again, and I needed someone to watch him while I picked up my final check. We were already on edge, financially drained, emotionally fried. I hated asking Trina, but she had insisted she didn't mind. We're family, she'd said. Besides, Naomi's with her dad this weekend. I've got time. That favor might have killed my son. I hit play on the second segment. At first, it was just ambient noise, doors creaking, a TV humming softly in the background. Then came her voice. Clear. Carefree. There you go, sweetie. Just a little drink. Andy made it special. Ari's voice, barely above a whisper. It tastes funny. Trina laughed. It's just the vitamins. Don't be a baby. There was a small cough. Then nothing. I sat on the hospital couch, still listening, heart pounding so loud I thought the nurses outside would hear it through the walls. My hands clenched around the phone. She drugged him. She poisoned him. And the way she said it, casual, even sweet, it chilled me deeper than anything else. I saved the file in 3 different folders, emailed it to myself, and stored it on a flash drive. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. Not anymore. That's when something else clicked. Something I hadn't even thought about until that moment, the withdrawals. My late father, God rest him, had set up a small trust fund for Ari when he was born. Nothing massive, just $50,000 tucked away in a custodial account. He'd been proud of being able to give something to the next generation, even if he never got to meet Ari before passing. When Celine and I added Trina as a secondary trustee years ago, back when we thought of her as responsible, back when we didn't know better, it seemed harmless. A backup. Just in case. But now, I opened the bank's app and logged into the trust account. It took a few tries to remember the password. I hadn't checked it in months. When the screen loaded, I blinked. The balance wasn't right. $8,800. I felt like I'd been punched. I pulled up the transaction history. The withdrawals were subtle, always under $5,000, likely to avoid triggering automated fraud flags. The memos read like a sick joke. Consultation fee. Homeopathic treatment. Caregiver stipend. One was labeled special supplement for sleep support. Rage built inside me, a rising tide that reached the edges of my vision. That money wasn't hers. It wasn't Celine's. It was for Ari. For his future, for emergencies. And she was using it like a damn slush fund. All while slowly killing him under the pretense of help. I took screenshots. Compiled the PDF statements. Started a folder. Ari. Legal. I called my friend Grant, a pediatric social worker I trusted with my life. We hadn't spoken much since I'd left work, but I didn't need to explain much. Just told him I needed backup. Told him everything. His silence was heavy, but then came his voice, low and steady. You're doing the right thing. Whatever you need, count me in. I didn't even hesitate. I need you listed as a backup guardian. I'm filing for full custodial rights, medical, legal, everything. He didn't blink. Done. I'll have the forms drawn up and couriered. I hung up and sat beside Ari again. I didn't know if he could hear me, but I spoke anyway. Buddy, I'm going to make sure she never gets near you again. I don't care who I have to fight. You're not going to be their pawn. Not anymore. The machines beeped. A nurse came in to check vitals, gave me a small, sympathetic smile, and left again. I spent the next few hours combing through the last 6 months of our lives. I found text threads between Trina and Celine that seemed innocuous at first. School pickups, dinner plans, errands, but some had an edge to them. Trina saying things like, he's too much work, or, you should take a break from him sometimes, Celine. Celine would laugh in emojis or send heart reactions. Nothing incriminating on its own, but in context, it painted a damning picture. I didn't know what Celine knew. I didn't know if she'd been complicit or just criminally negligent. But I knew she'd enabled Trina, trusted her blindly, and dismissed every concern I'd ever raised about how Trina treated Ari. I couldn't afford to wait. I filed the initial police report that night, including the audio file and screenshots. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud folder, shared it with Grant and a legal contact he recommended, Melina Cruz, a bulldog investigator with a reputation for pulling receipts others missed. I moved with precision because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was attempted murder. And if Trina thought she could harm my son, empty his future, and walk away with a smug little smile, she had another thing coming. The war had begun. The thing about truth is it doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It kicks the door in when it's good and ready, no matter how many eggshells you've laid across the floor. I walked into the precinct that night with Ari's monitor in my pocket and a fury I'd never worn before. The officer behind the glass asked what I was there for, and when I told him, his face shifted. Not pity, not disbelief, just professional concern. Let me get someone for you, he said, and 10 minutes later, I was in a room I never thought I'd be in, playing the most damning lullaby ever recorded. When the recording ended, Trina's voice, soft and syrupy, coaxing my son to drink something special, followed by that cough and an eerie silence. The officer didn't ask me if it was real. He didn't question my motive. He just asked for my phone and said, we'll make a copy. This will be enough to start. Enough to start. That phrase echoed in my chest like a heartbeat. Because I wasn't finished. Not even close. By sunrise, Trina was in handcuffs, scooped up at an upscale brunch spot in Midtown. One of those trendy places with mimosas served in fish bowls and avocado toast shaped like flowers. She had been laughing over a flute of Prosecco when the police arrived. I didn't have to imagine it. One of the waiters, a college kid who must have recognized her from somewhere, recorded the whole arrest on his phone and posted it online. The video made it to me before the police called. Her hands behind her back. Her mouth open in protest. What? This is a mistake. I'm her aunt. But mistakes don't come with audio proof. Premeditation. A child on life support. I expected to feel satisfied watching it. I didn't. Just tired. Bone-deep tired. My body was still in the hospital with Ari, but my mind was dragging chains through every decision I'd made in the last year. Every moment I'd let Trina talk me into something. Every time Celine defended her. Every time I let it slide. What I didn't expect was Celine's reaction. She didn't call right away. She showed up. At the hospital. Stormed in like the place belonged to her, even though she hadn't been there since the day Ari was admitted. Her heels clicked too loud on the vinyl floor, and when she entered the ICU, the nurse at the desk blinked like she was watching a soap opera unfold in real life. Lucas, Celine said, voice tight, already half an accusation. I stood up slowly. You're not supposed to be here. Her nostrils flared. You called the police on my sister? I blinked. Of all the things she could have said, how is Ari? What happened? Why didn't you tell me it was that? The anger rose in me so fast it blurred the edges of the room. She poisoned our son. Celine folded her arms, her lips trembling but not from sadness. You don't know that. She would never. I have the recording. She froze. I could see it in her eyes, the way her brain struggled to reconcile the sister she adored with the facts I just laid bare. But the thing that gutted me wasn't her disbelief. It was that she was more angry with me than with Trina. Even if she did, Celine whispered, you should have come to me first. We could have handled it as a family. I actually laughed. I didn't mean to. It escaped from somewhere raw and ragged. Ari was dying. There's no family meeting for that. She stepped closer to Ari's bed, but I moved in front of her. You don't get to pretend now. You let her babysit him even after I said she didn't take him seriously. You shrugged it off. You always did. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. We stood there like statues, our silence louder than the machines. The nurse behind the counter finally stood and approached. I'm sorry, ma'am, she said to Celine. You're not listed as a guardian anymore. Celine looked at her, confused. What? I had it changed, I said, and handed her the paper. Court documents. You're off the list. Effective this morning. She grabbed it with shaking hands, eyes darting across the legal language like it was written in another language. You wouldn't, she whispered. I already did, I said. Her mouth opened to protest, to plead, to scream, I'll never know which. But I turned and walked back to Ari's side and sat down. I didn't even glance back as she stormed out. Later that day, Harris, Celine's brother, called me. I shouldn't have picked up, but I did. Lucas, he said, I'm calling because we need to talk. No, I replied. We really don't. You're tearing this family apart. You've embarrassed Trina. Celine's a mess. And Naomi keeps asking where her aunt is. My jaw tightened. Ari almost died. Look, man, maybe it was just a mistake, he said. Kids get into stuff all the time. It's not like she meant to hurt him. She fed it to him, Harris. Silence. On tape. More silence. Then a scoff. You always did want to be the hero. I hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hospital recliner beside Ari's bed, watching the monitors like a sentry. Around 3 a.m., I pulled out the second recording, the one I hadn't played for anyone yet. Not the police. Not Grant. No one. It had been eating at me, the way she said it. I remembered the phrasing too well. I hit play. Trina's voice again, low and venom-laced, like a lullaby soaked in gasoline. If he dies, maybe Lucas and Celine will finally be free to live again. That kid's a chain around their necks. Then, as if that wasn't enough, her voice dropped to a whisper. He won't feel anything. Just sleep, little burden. I hit pause. My hand was trembling. I hadn't shared this one because I wasn't ready. Because it wasn't just evidence, it was motive. It changed everything. This wasn't recklessness. It was premeditation. It wasn't frustration. It was a plan. She wanted my son dead. I pressed the phone to my forehead and breathed. In. Out. Steady. I wanted to drive to the jail and look her in the eyes and ask her what part of Ari's laughter had made her decide he was a burden. What smile of his had pushed her over the edge. But I wouldn't. That wasn't justice. That was vengeance. And I had bigger things to protect now. I backed up the second recording, put it in the same cloud folder. But I didn't turn it in yet. It wasn't time. I wanted to wait. To see how far they'd go. If Celine or her family tried to twist the story again, I'd be ready. This was my bullet, and I wasn't going to waste it. 2 days later, they came to my door. Joyce, Celine's mother. Celine. Harris. All three, dressed like they were going to Sunday service. Their faces weren't angry. They were pleading. That made it worse. Lucas. Joyce said, Can we talk? Just talk. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. About what? About how this got so out of hand, she said. Out of hand. I repeated. Ari's still in the hospital. Joyce sighed. We're just trying to keep the family together. She didn't mean to hurt anyone. You've always struggled with the pressure, and we get that. But I'm not the one who whispered poison into a child's ear, I said. Harris looked down. Celine's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't falling for their version of grace. Not anymore. You're tearing this family apart, Joyce repeated. I smiled. Cold. Sharp. Maybe it needed to be torn apart. Then I shut the door. Behind me, in the next room, Ari's nightlight blinked softly, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. I didn't sleep after I closed the door on Celine and her family. I sat in the dark, watching the street through the blinds, one finger tapping against the baby monitor app on my phone like a nervous tick. I wasn't waiting for them to come back. I was waiting to feel something. Relief. Rage. Sadness. Anything that made sense. But what I felt was colder tea. The second recording still haunted me. I'd listened to it 3 times now. Each time it sank deeper into my bones. Her voice wasn't angry or frantic. Trina spoke with calm purpose, the way you might talk while stirring tea or folding laundry. If he dies, Maybe Lucas and Celine will finally be free to live again. Free. As if my son was a prison. A weight. A burden worth removing. And worse. Just sleep, little burden. It wasn't just attempted murder. It was a philosophical choice. A cleansing, in her mind. A fix to a problem that wasn't hers to define. I hadn't played that recording for the police. Not yet. I kept it like a blade tucked beneath my sleeve. I didn't know why I hesitated. Maybe because once I handed it over, everything would escalate. There would be no family discussions. No excuses left for Celine to cling to. It would split everything beyond repair. But that night at the door had already done that. They came to convince me I was wrong. Not to ask about Ari. Not to beg forgiveness for what their sister had done. No, only to keep the illusion alive, to keep the walls of their house of lies from crumbling. I saw it in Joyce's tone, in Harris's hunched shoulders, in Celine's desperate eyes. They weren't worried about Ari's suffering. They were worried about the damage this would do to the family name, to reputations, to their idea of what things were supposed to look like. Trina's voice whispered again in my head. "You won't feel anything." That was motive. That was intent. The next morning, I updated the cloud folder I'd been building. Audio files, bank records, text messages, screenshots, legal documents. Every thread of evidence woven into a story so undeniable, even a defense attorney would have to flinch. I gave access to Melina Cruz, my investigator. She didn't call. She showed up. I met her outside the hospital, under the metal overhang near the parking lot. She didn't dress like a typical PI, no trench coat, no oversized sunglasses. Just a dark leather jacket, jeans, and eyes that missed nothing. She handed me a manila envelope. "I dug into Trina and Harris's finances like you asked," she said. "But you'll want to see where some of that money went." I opened it and froze. Inside were printed transaction records from a joint account Trina and Harris had opened 3 months ago, shortly after I gave them access to Ari's trust for what I thought were health expenses. Multiple withdrawals had gone toward payments on a property, an Airbnb rental in Destin, Florida. A beach house. Newly furnished. Under the business name Morrow Family Coastal Retreat. I blinked. "Morrow." She nodded. "They listed you as a silent partner. Forged your signature. Likely used your name to secure a portion of the loan. That's identity fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. All tied to theft from a minor." My jaw clenched. "They used my son's trust fund to build a vacation rental. And they put it in my name." "They used his trauma to fund their comfort," she said, voice low. "And if the IRS audits the paperwork, it'll look like you're involved. Until we clear your name." I rubbed my face, trying to calm the volcano inside me. They didn't just hurt Ari. They tried to bury me with him. Financially, legally, professionally. All for the illusion of a family that wasn't theirs to build. Melina handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on there. Backed up. I'll file the IRS alert this afternoon. I suggest you change every password, lock down your credit, and prepare yourself. They're going to panic when this hits." "They already are," I muttered. "They just don't know how loud it's about to get." Back inside Ari's room, I sat beside him and studied his face. He looked peaceful now. Still pale, still too small beneath the covers, but breathing steadily. A few tubes remained, but the ventilator had been removed that morning. His chest rose and fell on its own. His eyelashes fluttered against his cheeks, and once, just once, he squeezed my hand. "I've got you," I whispered. "No one's ever going to hurt you again." I sent Celine one last text. "You are no longer listed as guardian. I've filed all legal paperwork. There will be no more visits, no more calls. You stood beside your sister when she tried to kill our son. I won't allow you near him again." She didn't respond, but Harris did. He left a voicemail later that night, voice shaking. "You think you've won, Lucas? You think people are going to believe this? You've always played the martyr. Always wanted to be the victim. But we see you. You're not a hero. You're just a bitter, broke man raising a kid you resent." I saved it. Another piece for the folder. Another truth they couldn't take back. I didn't shout. I didn't reply. Because here's what they didn't know, what Trina didn't know, what Celine refused to believe, what Harris mocked because it didn't fit his version of me. I never resented Ari. I resented them. Their judgment. Their distance. Their condescension when I couldn't attend every dinner party because Ari had therapy. Their sighs when I had to leave early because he didn't do well in crowded spaces. Their jokes about how special needs means special treatment. I carried it all. Quietly. Like a father should. But I wasn't quiet anymore. I had the motive now. The whisper that unraveled everything they pretended wasn't true. And I wasn't afraid to use it. Because I wasn't fighting for justice. I was fighting for my son's right to exist without being seen as a burden. And that, to me, was war worth starting. They didn't know I'd already been to court. By the time Celine and her family had finished knocking on my door and gaslighting me under the guise of reconciliation, the paperwork had been filed. Trina was formally removed from every line that connected her to Ari's care, hospital records, educational authorizations, financial access, all of it. I didn't want them hovering over his chart, pretending concern while quietly pushing the idea that maybe letting go would be merciful. I knew better now. Mercy was their mask. I'd seen the truth beneath it. What they really wanted was relief from responsibility, from appearances, from Ari himself. And I was done letting them define what love looked like. I sat in the hospital's social work office that morning, eyes gritty from another sleepless night, holding the finalized paperwork that declared me sole medical and legal guardian. Grant, my oldest friend, stood beside me. He didn't say much, just placed a firm hand on my shoulder when the hospital notary stamped the last page. His presence reminded me that not all people vanish when things get hard. Some show up and anchor you back to yourself. I left the hospital and went straight to the bank. Trina's access to Ari's trust fund had remained unnoticed for too long. I remembered the look of pride on my dad's face when he first showed me the paperwork, how he had set aside $50,000 for Ari when he was born. Might not be much in 20 years, but it's a start, he'd said. One day he'll need it more than we'll know. That day came faster than either of us expected, and Trina had stolen it in pieces. When the teller pulled up the transaction log, she blinked twice. These withdrawals, were they authorized, Mr. Morrow? I didn't answer right away. The rage had settled into something colder by then, something sharper. No, I said finally. I need the full record printed and the account locked. Permanently. She handed me a manila folder. 8 pages. Each line like a knife. Caregiver stipend. $3,200. Homeopathic consult, $4,000. Dietary transition kit, $2,800. Sleep support package, $1,600. Over and over. Labeled like she was investing in Ari's future while slowly feeding him poison and funding her lifestyle. She didn't think I'd notice. That was the insult buried inside the injury. When I got back to the hospital, I reviewed everything with Melina. She cross-checked the funds with property records and found even more damning links. Travel expenses disguised as care, spa treatments labeled as therapy breaks. Trina had cannibalized a child's safety net and used it to decorate her image of being a savior. The theft alone was bad enough, but paired with the poisoning, it felt like watching a magician saw a box in half only to realize there really was a person inside. I sat by Ari's bed and looked at his small hand wrapped in gauze. His chest still rising steady but slow. He had no idea how close he came to disappearing from this world. No idea what it cost to keep him in it. I brushed his hair from his forehead and whispered, "Your money's gone, buddy, but I'll get you something better. Peace. Safety. A life where you don't have to be someone's excuse." That night, I dreamed of courtrooms and corridors. Of Trina sitting across from me at a long table, pretending tears. Of Celine behind her, arms crossed like a queen in exile. And me, in a chair that didn't quite feel like it belonged to me, holding evidence that should have broken them but only reminded me how long I'd lived in their shadow. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do next. I called Melina. I want every piece of financial evidence turned over to the police and to the IRS. "You're sure?" she asked. "They wanted to break me through my son. They used his name to steal from him. It ends now. Because this wasn't about healing anymore. It was about drawing a line in blood." The courtroom smelled like old carpet and nervous sweat. I sat at the front table, palms resting on my knees, back straight like it would help me stay calm. Grant sat behind me. Melina was further back, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Across the aisle sat Joyce, Celine, and Harris. Every one of them dressed like they were attending a graduation, not a hearing to decide whether my son would be safe from them. Celine avoided my gaze. Harris didn't. He smirked. The arrogance made my jaw tighten. Then the door opened, and Joyce walked in like she owned the floor. Her voice had the same softness it always did, measured, polished, a tone that worked on charity boards and PDA meetings. "Lucas is a good father," she began, "but he's been under tremendous emotional strain since Ari's diagnosis. He's isolated himself. cut family off. He's paranoid and, frankly, obsessed. I clenched my jaw. Obsession? My son was nearly murdered. She kept going, layering words like a seasoned actress. He's trying to control the narrative, Your Honor. He believes we're the enemy. But all we want is to help Ari. My lawyer stood. May I respond? The judge nodded. And I stood. I'd like to play a recording. Joyce turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Celine reached for her arm like she could silence the whole world by grip. But the judge waved me on. I pulled my phone out, synced it to the courtroom's Bluetooth speaker, and hit play. Trina's voice echoed into the room. If he dies, maybe Lucas and Celine will finally be free to live again. Gasps. Someone dropped a pin. Harris shifted in his seat. Celine looked down. Joyce froze, her lips parting but no sound following. Then the rest played. He won't feel anything. Just sleep, little Burton. Silence fell. The judge didn't move for a moment. Then she slowly looked over her glasses and said, Mr. Morrow, full guardianship is granted. Effective immediately. Joyce's mouth opened. Harris muttered something. Celine finally looked at me, and for once, she had nothing to say. But it wasn't over. After the hearing, Melina handed me more documents. Found the property paperwork. Trina and Harris used the stolen trust money to fund a beach rental. The kicker? They listed you as a silent partner. Signature forged. I stared at the pages, fake contracts, down payments, even a short blurb from the Airbnb listing. Family retreat owned by a devoted father. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I called the IRS. By the end of the day, the house was under investigation. Their accounts were frozen. And for the first time in months, I felt like the tide had turned. Not because I wanted revenge. Because Ari deserved to grow up without ghosts hanging over his crib. The next morning began with a phone call I didn't answer. It was Harris. Then Celine. Then Harris again. I let them ring. I knew what it was about before I even checked my email. The IRS doesn't wait for courtesy. When they investigate, they move fast, and apparently they'd already frozen the accounts tied to the so-called Morrow family coastal retreat. I could almost hear Harris's panic through the missed calls. The knock came at 8:27 a.m. A heavy, deliberate knock. I opened the door to two men in navy windbreakers, one of them already flashing credentials. Mr. Morrow, the taller one said, we're not here for you. But we'd like to ask a few questions about a rental property that's been registered under your name. I invited them in and handed them the folder Melina prepared. Everything I have is in here. Forged documents. Stolen funds. My son's trust was drained without consent. Trina and Harris used the money to put a down payment on a beach rental. They listed me as a silent partner. The agents flipped through the paperwork, nodding occasionally. The younger one paused at the photo of the fake contract with my name scrawled across the bottom. You're not in business with them at all? I shook my head. I didn't even know about the property until last week. My son's in the hospital, fighting to breathe. They were throwing barbecues by the ocean and calling it therapy. They exchanged a glance. You'll be receiving formal notice shortly, but from what we see, your documentation clears you. We'll handle the rest. As they left, I felt something strange settle into my chest. Not victory, not even relief. It was a heavy calm. The kind of stillness that comes when your enemies finally run out of places to hide. By noon, Harris had called 13 times. By 2, he showed up in person. He didn't knock. He pounded, fists to wood like a man trying to break the past wide open. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. You should leave. What the hell did you do? He snapped. Our bank accounts are frozen. Trina's credit cards are locked. The property manager called and said the rental's under investigation. You couldn't just let this go. You stole from a child, I said evenly. You forged my name. You siphoned money from a dying boy. It wasn't like that. Don't insult me, Harris. He shook his head like he couldn't believe the words. You don't get to be the victim here, Lucas. You've always wanted this, some tragic story to hide behind. Your son's not a saint. He's a burden, and you know it. I didn't say a word, just stared. He must have mistaken my silence for weakness. You think this makes you a hero, he sneered. You're just a bitter man using your kid to burn everything down. That's when I handed him the envelope. What's this? He asked. Restraining order, I said. You're not allowed within 50 feet of Ari, or me, or the hospital. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You can't do that. I already did. He tore it open, skimmed it, and for the first time, I saw it, the crack in the mask. The bravado faded. His face paled. He turned, mumbled something I didn't catch, and walked away without another word. An hour later, Celine arrived at the hospital. She wasn't dressed for war. No heels, no makeup mask, no sharp tongue. Just jeans and a sweatshirt. Like she was trying to blend in with the sorrow. I met her at the door. "I just want to see him," she said quietly. "You're not listed as guardian anymore." She looked down. "I know. I saw the papers. But I brought something for him." She held up a stuffed bear, Ari's favorite kind, the same brand he used to cuddle during his early therapy sessions. I didn't move. "Lucas," she tried, voice trembling. "Please." I didn't know what Trina was doing. "You defended her. She's my sister. She poisoned our son." Her eyes welled. "I didn't want to believe it. You didn't want to lose her. So you chose her over him." She shook her head slowly, lip trembling. "I just want to make this right. You can't." And I meant it. There was a time when I might have softened. When Celine's tears might have pulled me back into orbit. But that time had passed. I had heard Trina's voice. I had watched Celine stand in court, silent when she should have defended her son. I had seen the truth. "You need to leave," I said, stepping between her and Ari's door. She held out the bear again. "Please." I didn't take it. "Mail it." Her hand dropped slowly. "You wouldn't do this if you didn't still care." I looked at her, not with hatred, but with the kind of sorrow that runs deeper than anger. "I care about my son. That's all." She swallowed hard, stepped back, and for the first time, she didn't argue. She just walked away. As the elevator doors closed behind her, I turned and went back into Ari's room. He was sleeping, the machines quiet for once. A monitor beeped softly near his head. His hand twitched against the blanket, and I slid mine into his. "We're okay now," I whispered. "They can't get near you again." The nurse came by a moment later and said something about his feeding tube being reduced. It meant he was getting stronger. It meant maybe soon I'd hear his voice again, laugh again, breathe without fearing each moment might be the last. I looked at the bear Celine had left on the floor beside the door. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, then quietly tossed it into the bin outside the room. Some things didn't get to stay. Some ties had to be cut for good. That night, Ari opened his eyes for the first time in days. He looked right at me and smiled. The last time I saw Trina in person, she was wearing a floral sundress and holding a mason jar of lemonade like she was auditioning for a Southern Living cover shoot. It was a lie, of course. All of it. Her ease, her posture, her curated charm. But that image stuck with me, even as the footage arrived from Melina 2 days after the restraining orders were in place. The clip began with a drone shot, her rental property along the Gulf, newly painted, string lights dancing across the porch. Music played softly in the background, and laughter floated up from a grill stationed at the center of the patio. She was throwing a party. That was the day they came for her. 2 plainclothes officers moved in from opposite ends of the yard, not drawing weapons but moving fast enough to silence the conversation mid-pour. Trina's hand hovered over the cooler as they identified themselves. One of her guests dropped a plate. Someone cursed under their breath. She didn't run, of course not. She tilted her head, blinked in confusion, and muttered something about a mistake. Her performance was flawless. But I didn't watch all of it. I'd seen enough. I paused the video and closed the laptop, then turned to Ari, who was sitting up for the first time, trying to sip juice through a straw. His hands were still unsteady, but his eyes, those bright, curious eyes, had come back to life. He was alive, breathing, drinking, and she was in handcuffs. That was enough for me. I didn't post about it. Didn't text anyone. I didn't even tell Celine, who had started sending short, guilt-laced emails asking how Ari was doing. I ignored everyone, but not everyone stayed silent. Jason, the father of Naomi, Trina's daughter, posted a 6-paragraph Facebook rant that quickly made its rounds. He called the arrest. He claimed the recording had been manipulated, the financial records misunderstood, the entire legal system stacked against a strong black woman who dared to help. I could have clapped back. I didn't, because I didn't need to. 3 hours after he posted, someone shared the court documents. Public record. The guardianship ruling. The financial fraud filing. The IRS's civil freeze notice. Then someone else posted the transcript of the audio, Trina's voice, line by line. Just sleep, little burden. If he dies, it was out there. And the comment section turned cold. Under Jason's post, people wrote things like, "You can't gaslight a coma. Didn't she throw a party while the kid was still in ICU? She literally used the child's money to buy beach furniture. Within a day, Jason deleted the post. Within 2, his profile was gone. I didn't care where he went. All I cared about was what it meant, truth rising like steam after a long silence. Celine tried too. She posted a filtered photo of her and Ari from 2 years ago, captioned, "Praying for healing in this difficult time. Family above all. Broken heart hashtag for Ari." That one set me off. Because it wasn't real. She hadn't visited in days. Hadn't sat beside him. Hadn't held his hand or wiped the sweat from his brow during fever spikes. Her love was performative. Shiny. And it made me sick to see her rewrite herself as some tragic mother exiled from her child by cruel circumstance. But I didn't go to war with her online. I had something better: stillness, facts, and a son who was healing. The hospital released Ari a week later. We didn't go back to the old house. I'd already signed a lease near Lake Hill, a quiet neighborhood where the only sound at night was crickets and the occasional dog barking. A small place, but clean, safe. The kind of home where Ari could start over without reminders hiding in every corner. I carried him in myself, his arms wrapped around my neck, still a little weak but excited in a way that made my chest ache with gratitude. The living room had no furniture yet, just boxes and a single folding chair, but he looked around like it was a castle. "Do we live here now?" he asked. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "Just you and me." He nodded. "No more Aunt Trina? No more anyone who doesn't love you the right way?" That seemed to satisfy him. We ate dinner on the floor that night, grilled cheese sandwiches and apple slices. Ari wore his favorite socks, the ones with the little rocket ships, and laughed at a cartoon playing on my laptop. It was the kind of ordinary joy I hadn't felt in months. Later, I opened a letter that came from the court. It detailed Trina's second arrest, her formal charges, and the judge's initial rulings. 3 years, minimum, with a possible extension pending sentencing on the financial charges. Harris's case was still unfolding, but he was facing a heavier sentence: wire fraud, forgery, theft from a minor, and obstruction. The judge had awarded me $20,000 in civil damages. Money I knew I'd never see. Trina had nothing left. Harris's assets were frozen. But I didn't care. I hadn't fought for the money. I fought for the message. That night, while Ari slept curled against my side, I scrolled through Celine's most recent post. Another filtered photo. Another caption about strength and betrayal. Another sea of strangers sending her love while she played the role of forgotten mother. And I realized something. She never truly saw Ari. Not the way I did. Not as a boy full of light and questions and bravery, but as something between her and the life she thought she deserved. She wanted him better when it was convenient. She loved him most when he was quiet, unseen, easy to frame in a smiling photo. But now he was here, breathing, growing, laughing, and she was on the outside. I could have messaged her, could have reminded her what she gave up, but I didn't. I closed the app, turned off the light, pulled Ari closer, because the world outside could keep spinning in chaos. Inside our quiet home, my son was alive, and that was enough. I didn't go to the trial. I wasn't required to be there, and after everything we'd been through, the last thing I needed was to sit in a courtroom and listen to lawyers twist Ari's pain into legal strategy. My voice was already in the evidence twice. The first recording sealed Trina's fate, the second buried Harris. And even if I hadn't testified in person, my presence was in every syllable they played, every detail they submitted. I stayed home with Ari, holding him through the last days of his recovery, because that was the only place I belonged. Trina pled guilty. Her lawyer tried to soften the blow, claiming she suffered from emotional distress tied to family strain, and that she had no intent to harm. But intent didn't matter when your voice was recorded saying, "Just sleep, little burden." No jury could overlook that. And in the end, she didn't even let it get that far. She took the plea deal. 3 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. I didn't celebrate when I heard. There was nothing to celebrate. A woman who should have protected Ari tried to erase him instead. Now she would sit behind bars, counting days while my son counted stars on his pajamas. Harris didn't plead. He went to trial, swore up and down that he didn't know where the money came from, that the signatures weren't his, that he'd simply trusted his sister to handle the financial details. The prosecution dragged him through the mud. Exhibit after exhibit, each withdrawal tracked, each receipt documented. The photos of the beach rental, the Airbnb listing, the reviews from strangers who had stayed in a house built on stolen trust. They even played a snippet of a voicemail he left me, the one where he said Ari was a burden. I didn't have to be in court to know how that landed. The jury convicted him of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and falsifying legal documents. 5 years, with restitution. The judge ordered him to repay the $41,200 drained from Ari's trust and added an additional $20,000 in damages awarded to me for emotional and financial distress. It was a symbolic win. I'd never see a dime. His accounts were frozen. He'd buried himself under a fake company and forged paperwork. But I didn't care about the money. My son had survived. The people who tried to end his story would now spend years behind glass. And still, Celine sent a letter. It arrived on a Friday, tucked into the mailbox of our new place in Lake Hill, handwritten on ivory stationery. No return address. No formal salutation. Just, Lucas. Her handwriting looked the same. Neat. A little too perfect, like it was trying to prove something. I stood in the doorway with it for a long while, the envelope heavy in my hand, heavier than it should have been. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. There was nothing she could write that would change the fact that when I needed her most, she defended the people who tried to kill our son. I walked out to the patio and lit a match. The letter burned slow. The flames curled the paper inward, words I didn't care to read turning to ash between my fingers. I watched it until there was nothing left but smoke and a charred corner. Then I tossed it into the tin bin and walked back inside. Ari was in the living room building something out of blocks, his latest obsession. He was better now, stronger. He asked more questions again, smiled more often. His energy had returned in bursts, like spring sunlight through winter fog. I knelt beside him. "What is it?" I asked. He grinned, pressing 2 pieces together. "It's a robot bear. He protects houses." "From what?" "Bad people." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "He sounds like a good bear." "He's the best," Ari said. "He makes sure only the nice people get in." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. That's a good job to have. Later that night, after Ari was asleep, I sat at my laptop and pulled up the digital folder I'd once used to store evidence, the voice recordings, financial documents, case files. I deleted it. Every file, every screenshot, every trace of the past that I didn't need to carry anymore. I had fought the fight. I had won. Not in court, not in the headlines, but in the small, quiet hours where a boy built robot bears and asked questions that deserved soft, safe answers. The next morning, I took Ari to the lake. It was one of those perfect late summer days where the breeze carried a hint of cool but the sun still kissed your shoulders. We rented a small paddle boat, his legs too short to reach the pedals but his excitement enough to power the whole lake. We drifted out past the lily pads, him laughing every time a duck swam by. There was peace in it. Not the kind that comes after victory, but the kind that comes when you finally realize the war is behind you. Afterward, we got ice cream. Chocolate for him. Coffee chip for me. "Daddy," he said, licking his cone, "do bad people always go to jail?" I thought about Trina, about Harris, about Celine and her filtered grief, about the people who watched Ari struggle and still chose silence. "Not always," I said gently, "but sometimes. And when they don't, we find other ways to make sure they don't come back." He nodded like that made sense. "Like moving." "Exactly." He took another bite, ice cream smudging his chin. "I like our new house better. It doesn't feel scary." That hit me in the chest. "It's yours," I said. "Everything about it. Every room. Every corner. Nobody gets to make it scary again." That night, I watched him sleep from the hallway, his chest rising in that quiet, steady rhythm that used to scare me because it felt too fragile. Now it sounded like power. Like promise. I sat on the couch with a warm drink and my phone off, letting the silence hold me. Some people go looking for closure in courtrooms and confrontation. I found mine in a quiet kitchen, in a boy's laughter, in the absence of chaos. Celine's family burned every bridge and thought they could walk back over ash. I burned the path behind me and never looked back. Ari turned 7 last week. He asked for one thing: cupcakes. Not the store-bought kind. Not the kind with perfect swirls and theme toppers. Just cupcakes we could make together. Chocolate with mint frosting. I smiled at the request, not because it was simple, but because of what it represented. A year ago, I was sitting beside his hospital bed wondering if he'd make it. Wondering if he'd ever smile again, ask for anything again. Now, he stood on a kitchen stool in our Lake Hill home, his hands covered in flour and frosting, his laughter rising like sunlight through our windows. The boy who nearly slipped from this world was here, sticky, smiling, alive. We called them superpower muffins, at his suggestion. Said the mint frosting made them stronger. I didn't argue. I just handed him the whisk and let him lead. There was something sacred in watching him take charge of his own joy. In the past, there was always someone offering suggestions, controlling the moment. Trina, Celine, Joyce. Now it was just us. No manipulation, no performance, no obligations. While the cupcakes baked, we danced to the sound of our small speaker humming Motown and old pop songs. Ari had no rhythm, but that didn't stop him. He spun in circles, made up moves on the spot. I followed, laughing like I hadn't in years, like nothing had ever broken me. Because maybe it hadn't. Not really. It had bent me, bruised me, scarred me, but not broken. After we licked the beaters and scraped the bowl, Ari leaned against the counter, legs swinging off the stool. "Daddy?" he asked, licking mint from his thumb. "Is Aunt Trina gone forever?" I knew this question would come. I'd prepared answers in my head for months, clinical, truthful, sanitized. But in that moment, I realized he didn't want the legal explanation. He didn't want timelines or sentencing guidelines. He wanted assurance. "She's not part of our story anymore," I said. He nodded, like that was enough. And it was. We brought the cupcakes to the park, just the two of us. He didn't want a party. Just a few balloons, a picnic blanket, and a small thermos of chocolate milk. The weather was perfect, warm but breezy, the kind of day that felt like it had been designed just for us. A few ducks waddled past as he stuffed his cheeks with frosting and hummed between bites. I watched him, and for the first time in months, my mind didn't drift to hospital monitors or courtrooms or betrayal. I just watched my son eat a cupcake. Afterward, we lay on the grass, side by side, clouds passing lazily above. "Are we going to move again?" he asked. "No," I said, without hesitation. "This is home. No more hospitals? Not unless we're just visiting someone." He turned to me. "Do you miss Mommy?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I needed to phrase it the right way. I missed the idea of her, who I thought she was, but not who she turned out to be. Ari seemed to process that in his own quiet way. Then he said, "I don't remember her much. Just her perfume. It made my nose itchy." I laughed. "That sounds about right." He smiled. "Do you think she'll ever want to come back?" I considered that. Maybe. But that doesn't mean we have to let her in. He didn't say anything else for a while. Just rested his head against my shoulder. The wind rustled the trees. Some other family nearby was singing happy birthday over a cooler. But our celebration didn't need noise. It just needed peace. And we had that now. That night, after Ari fell asleep on the couch during movie time, I carried him to bed and tucked him in. I lingered at his door, watching him breathe, still in awe of the fact that we'd made it here. Later, I sat at the kitchen table, an old journal open in front of me, the legal pad beside it. I'd started rewriting my will the week Trina was convicted. I'd updated it again after Harris was sentenced. But now it was final. No edits. No second guesses. I named Grant as Ari's guardian, should anything happen to me. I included instructions about the house, the trust account I'd rebuilt from my own savings, and the letters I'd written for Ari to read when he was older, letters that told him everything, truthfully, with love, but never with bitterness. I wanted him to understand where he came from, but I never wanted him to carry the burden of what others had done. I also included a line, short, almost forgettable, but essential. No member of the Celine Monroe or Trina Blake family shall have custodial or visitation rights to Ari Morrow, nor access to any asset, record, or communication tied to his care. Then I signed it, dated it, sealed it. Afterward, I opened my phone and deleted every old message thread with Celine. I erased the backup folders from the cloud, not because I forgave them, but because I was done remembering them, done letting their voices echo in places they no longer belonged. I reclaimed my last name officially, Morrow. I filed the papers at the county office and removed every trace of Monroe from Ari's school forms and healthcare records. We were starting over, on our terms, without shadows. A week later, I walked Ari to school. He wore a new backpack, one he picked himself, bright blue with a stitched lightning bolt across the back. He squeezed my hand tightly as we crossed the street. "Do you think people at school will like me?" he asked. I knelt down. "You're easy to like, buddy. Just be yourself." He nodded. "Okay." When we got to the gate, he turned. "You gonna be okay, Daddy?" I smiled. "I already am." He ran inside. waving once before disappearing into the crowd of children. I stood there a moment longer, watching the rhythm of the morning, the bustle of parents, the sound of doors opening and closing, the laughter that came easy to children not weighed down by the cruelty of adults. And I realized how much space had cleared inside me. Pain doesn't disappear. It settles. And when it does, it makes room for things you never thought you'd feel again. Joy, safety, calm. Later that evening, we baked more cupcakes. No occasion, just because he asked. He called them celebration muffins this time. What are we celebrating? I asked. He shrugged. That we get to be us. And that was enough. I watched him swirl green frosting across the tops, his little hands steady and sure. And I thought about how far we'd come. From ICU monitors to mint frosting. From betrayal to baking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't shout my pain into a void. I raised a boy back to life. And in that still kitchen, with the smell of chocolate in the air and the soft hum of his laughter beside me, I understood something I'd been chasing for months. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. Peace is the sound of a whisk in a metal bowl, the sight of a child licking frosting from his fingers, the knowing that no one else gets to write your ending. We were finally free, and we were enough.